Thanks, Nancy. And thank you everyone for joining in. It's really I'm really excited to be hosting this discussion today with this illustrious panelist set. And we have observed that the journey for automation overall, the last five few years, has really moved beyond the siloed initiatives of cost efficiencies, and it's become more of a strategic program where you're driving not just efficiency but integrated experience outcomes for all kinds of stakeholders in an enterprise today, right? And so let's just dive right into the discussion. And maybe we can start with you, Chris. We've seen that companies really relied on automation during COVID times. We're back to a very tough macroeconomic environment today. There's high inflation, high interest rates. There's the looming recession as well. How do you think automation will play a role in these tough times?
Yeah, I think most would contend that technology has always served as one of the greatest deflationary levers. So I think you'll continue to see that. And I really try to look to data to determine how, as a company, we should navigate this environment, because I think you're absolutely right. The next, let's say, 12 to 18 months are probably going to be pretty challenging. And so there's a nonpartisan paper through the National Bureau of Economic Research, NBER, in the US. And this paper is called Job Polarization and Jobless Recoveries. And what it does is it actually looks at the economic downturns from 1950 forward and the impact on the labor workforce relative to the adoption of automation. So two PhD economists published this paper, and it's really, really interesting. I think very relevant for everyone that's probably listening to this, whether they're a vendor or they're a consumer of enterprise software. And what you find is that during these economic downturns, typically what happens as the companies go into the downturn is that they try to lean their businesses. And majority of the input costs are on the labor side. And so they end up doing a reduction in force, laying off. And I think you're starting to see that right now in the market. But what the paper and the data shows is that 6 months from the trough of the recession or the economic downturn, the middle management that's basically been gutted, that lost their jobs during this downturn, the white collar executives that made those decisions realize that the sky isn't falling. They can see the end, so the light is near, and they have to prepare for that growth. And so they need to get that capacity back online. They can't afford to hire the workforce back. And so they turn to automation. And so the adoption of automation has actually accelerated, especially in the last three recessions, in the 91 recession, which was the savings and loan, and the Gulf War, and in the '01 dot-com bubble, and in the more recent '08, '09 GFC, the Great Financial Crisis. And so you see automation being adopted at increasing levels to backfill that capacity. So not only is it used as a deflationary lever, but it's also used as a capacity backfill. And I think we're going to see the exact same thing playing out over the next 12 months.
Got it, Chris. So, yeah, I think automation will almost make enterprises recession proof in some sense. So, certainly, I think looking forward to that role that automation can play in. Claire, I think maybe I can bring you in. Banking and financial services firms were at the receiving end of the last like great recession that we saw. How are you thinking about automation in these times? Is there fundamentally something that will change in terms of how do you leverage automation and how do you drive automation programs going forward?
That's a good question. I would say we're still transitioning from having hired quite a few people in the last few years to now putting things on hold and looking to see what the economy will look like in the next 12 to 18 months. So I would say we're a bit in a transition and we're looking at where we spend our money and how. and see how automation could potentially bridge the gap between where we are today and where we would want to wait on some of the bigger investments from a technology standpoint, and see how especially some of the low-code automations could really help provide some not only efficiencies, but also benefit around turnaround time, quality to clients and employees alike until we have funding available for larger and bigger investments. So it's going to be interesting to see for the next 12 or 18 months how automation is being considered, if it's going to be a stopgap and somewhat of a bridge for larger initiatives, or if it's also going to be put on pause and basically keep it to a minimum.
Okay. Jet, any thoughts from your side on this topic?
Yeah, I think that what Chris points out is really interesting, because I think, as you went through those periods of time, the type of automation that was appropriate or what was available at the time was at a different level. I mean, if you think about what we've had now, the acceleration of the automation that we have now and the proliferation of the automation that we have already in the organizations is just, so far in advance than what we had during those periods, right? Even you think back to the 08, 09 bubble, when I was in the middle of that at Credit Suisse, which was one of the main players in all that, the automation we had there was nothing. I mean, we had what we thought was, we had screen scraping tools. Wow, that was, we had Lotus Notes doing screen scraping stuff. That was the big deal, right? Now you look forward to what we have already in place, and most of these organizations that they can already continue the leveraging of that, right? And so now what you're thinking about, I think when we talk to our customers, our Nintex customers, it's thinking about, well, how do you leverage that and combine those things? How do you orchestrate across those multiple platforms? How do you leverage the synergies between the automation platforms that you have that you probably haven't thought about before? So I think, again, because as Chris points out, we're already in a situation where they're already having to reduce costs or think smarter about the money that they have. So you've got technology, but are you getting the most out of that technology? And I always like to talk about, coming out of manufacturing myself, how do you sweat those assets? And are you really sweating those assets? And I think sometimes if you think about it, the way companies have been organized, the guys that run the machine learning stuff don't necessarily talk to the guys that run the cognitive stuff, which don't talk to the guys that run the RPA stuff, which don't talk to the guys that run the Pego or the Appian, the workflow stuff. Well, how do you bring all those things together and think about a collective utilization about automation as a holistic platform and a holistic toolkit to really drive synergy, and how you help then, as Chris said, bring capacity back online when you need it in a completely different way. And I think, again, to me, that's a big advantage that we have right now. Huge advantage.
Yeah. For anyone born after 1985 that's listening to this, you may have to explain Lotus.
By the way, in Europe, we still have customers using Lotus, by the way.
Yeah.
I didn't even know it still existed. I don't even know how they're running it, but you're right, Chris.
Okay. No, I think interesting thoughts, Jet, and I think it's a good way to also segue into the next question I had was really around. I think you spoke about these siloed initiatives, RPA being run separately, AI being run separately. I think maybe Kelly, we can get your thoughts on this one, right? So, do you see automation now becoming a part of larger digital transformation initiatives? And I think a lot of the initial waves of automation was more bottoms up, siloed initiatives that just got like quick wins in terms of efficiencies, some minor cost savings. But do you see that automation, now that it's becoming more strategic, it'll sort of get embedded within the larger digital transformation programs? Or do you still see those automation programs being run as more separate, more focused initiatives by themselves?
Well, I think that they will. Many organizations like Mercy, we're really placing automation within our strategic platform, right? We have to. It's really automation and innovation. It really allows organizations to shift left or think a little bit differently about how they perform the work. And I think that that's a very important key, right? So you have to integrate it to everything. Just like Jet said, you have to start thinking about how do you integrate automation within your existing platform? I mean, your platform is going to change, right? We have adopted enterprise architecture over the past few years. We're now fully integrated with security, right? So security used to be over in their own dark office, right? Nobody wanted to talk to security. Now, if you don't talk to security, your stuff's not going in the system. And I think when you are thinking about automation and innovation, you really have to think about that it's tool agnostic. And that's why it's so important I see a lot of organizations having these automation platforms or automation initiatives, and they're very focused on one application. And if you don't get that out of your mindset and think about all of the applications across the organization that have automation capabilities, you're losing out. And that's why it's so important to bring enterprise architecture within that fold. They should be the ones to say, this is the appropriate technology, because they are directly tied to the strategic goals of the technology within the organization. So I think that is so vitally important, that if you don't do that, you're losing out. I was just at a conference where I met you and last month. And one of the things I kept hearing as well, when you were talking about ROI, is that sponsorship. So we started our journey in automation a long time ago, but really focusing on automation in 2019. And we were able to charge forward because we had executive leader sponsorship. We added it to our overall strategy. I mean, we are all in, right? So we were able to move the needle forward, and that happened right before COVID. I mean, right before COVID. And it was, we had a reduction in force. And just like Chris said, we had to automate in order to survive within the organization. And it was so vitally important that we had that support. And what I was hearing at the conference that we were at was their automation program. They started at the same time I did, and it fell. They had to focus on COVID and getting ready for COVID, instead of utilizing that as an opportunity to really accelerate automation across their organization. So just some key things that I saw at the conference that we were at last month as well.
Got it. And Claire, how is the automation program for you looking like, right? Is it more focused one just on some of the automation related technologies? Are there other sort of technologies and then platforms you're bringing in the mix as you think about the overall transformation and ROI outcomes that you can get out of this?
Sure. So at Silicon Valley Bank, we've been on our automation journey for about 5 years. And I would say it's been putting building block after building block. So we have to start at zero and really understand the technology, understand what it can and cannot do, so that we know where it would benefit and we know what to avoid from a pitfall standpoint. So it's been a combination of our internal team and also learning from some of the vendors out there. And the way we have tackled it here at the bank is through transformation initiatives, so that we were incubated by the finance organization, so that we had the freedom to start with RPA technology and really have a few bots in production before we decided what to do more broadly. So it's a marathon and not a sprint. And we really started by walking and crawling. And I would say we're pretty far along now, 5 years later. And to Kelly's point, we're partnering with our solution architecture team, with our technology team. It is still somewhat of business-led initiative, but IT-enabled, because the opportunities and the ROI, and even from a client standpoint, is really from a business standpoint. What's been interesting here is how we have put different automation technologies under one roof. And we've leveraged our process improvement team, because automation is related to processes as well as technology, and we don't want to automate a bad process. So we typically would look at the process itself. Can we remove any waste? Can we make the process more efficient? And then if that requires automation or technology to create those efficiencies, then we would tag on those automations. So it's been a very deliberate and very organic approach to how we have built our Automation Center of Excellence. And now we're actually looking to stand up a Center of Excellence much more broadly with different teams at the bank.
Got it. And I think it's interesting in terms of when we talk about automation, it's mostly about cost savings, about time savings that people have sort of a mind share with respect to automation around. But maybe Chris, you can share some thoughts in terms of if you have started talking to customers about more outcomes around top line growth, around enhanced experiences for customers, employees, and partners, and not looking beyond just the efficiency kind of messaging around automation as well.
Yeah. So maybe just to put so I promised Prankar I would get to that right away, but to put a bow on what Claire had mentioned, I think Kelly was alluding to this as well, is it's really interesting. I heard building blocks. I heard, disparate IT applications that sort of need to be connected as they really look to drive like high value transformation with their automation investments. And so we're absolutely seeing the need for what we're seeing called an orchestration layer. So using automation to orchestrate across sort of the complex, disparate applications that organizations sort of have at the heart of their business operations. And so we are seeing like automation really driving that orchestration to simplify that level of complexity that most large global enterprises have sort of, invested and innovated themselves into. And so it's really interesting how we're seeing that play out. And what that's driving to is that the conversation, let's call it 7 years ago, around a lot of the automation technologies that, Jet and my company sort of bring to market, was really the business case was built on sort of cost takeout. How can we reduce the transaction cost? How can we, help empower the workforce? But there was a cost takeout element to it. And that has absolutely shifted. What we're seeing is that it's more about improving the experience. And I know that's such an overplayed word right now, but it is true. Nearly every enterprise customer that we're bringing this into is looking to, and I think it's because of the war on talent, how competitive the market has been, that employees now have optionality. And so they don't have to stay with you. Partners don't have to stay with you if you have a lot of friction in the employee experience, in the ecosystem partner experience, and customers will definitely leave you very, very quickly. And so removing that friction, I think, has absolutely caused this shift in thinking about automation from a cost takeout perspective to an experience and a revenue lift perspective. Because when you remove a lot of that friction, what you do is you have very sticky customers, employees, and partners, and through that you can oftentimes monetize that. And so we are seeing that, wholesale across many of the verticals that we service.
Got it. And Chris, I think it's interesting you mentioned, I think customer experience is probably something that people are really focused on. I think during COVID, employee experience also came to the center stage as you were discussing. But I think partner experience is something that is always sort of at the back burner, right? And of course, I think it depends on the company that you talk to, but depending on the DNA that they have, partner experience may or may not be the priority. So it'll be good to understand if there are certain use cases or certain scenarios you can highlight where maybe automation is helping partner experience be getting enhanced as well.
Yeah, a very big one is we have accounts payable and electronic invoicing automation solutions that are built for a buyer and supplier network, where you have a buyer, a very large global company that requires tens of thousands of suppliers to provide parts, goods, and services to that enterprise. And those partners, if you make it difficult for them, they will drive their business to other buyers, or they will increase their prices to account for that friction that they have to overcome. And so you can very quickly find yourself as a buyer not being sort of the buyer of choice, which is going to limit the partners that can provide supplies to you, which inevitably will hurt your delivery to your end customers. And so we're seeing the friction between buyers and partners being removed, and it's primarily through what we see as marketplaces, and those marketplaces are really being supported by automation solutions.
Got it. And Kelly, for you, I think if you look at your automation program, would experience be one of the priorities that you're prioritizing right now, or is it really, I think, at least in the short to medium term, it's more cost, specifically, I think, given the macroeconomic stuff that we spoke about?
We are driving experience. So we actually even have an entire building. It's going to be our Mercy Vallis building that is all driven around patient experience, right? It's when they get in the parking lot, can we identify who they are so we can automatically check them or alert the department that they're here? Can we utilize camera technology and other types of technology to direct them when they come in? Do they want a map? How complicated can hospitals be to navigate? I know that I've gotten lost in hospitals. We even have, we're even thinking about how do we direct patients to a parking spot that's near their clinic? Because in one of our hospitals right now, you can park anywhere that you want, but when you get in the building, you might have to, walk 2 miles to get to your appointment. So we're really taking a step back and saying, how can we utilize innovation and automation to enhance that patient experience? And it's all about patient experience, at least in the medical field, because if you're not looking at their experience, they have the choice, just like Chris said, they have the choice to go somewhere else, right? And we want to make that very seamless, very painless for them. And then we also think about, before they get there, what can we do? After they leave, what can they do? If they happen to become inpatient, what are we looking at doing? What is that experience as an inpatient versus an outpatient? So we're all in for the experience from a patient perspective. Now, let me talk a little bit about coworker experience as well. So we're also looking inward and saying, what can we do, or what programs can we implement from a customer or from a coworker perspective that can even enhance that patient experience even more, right? So we're looking at, some things we have to look at, like the CARES Act and things like that when it comes to patient billing. But we're also saying, what can we do to make it easier? Can we have a seamless, this is how much your stay is going to cost, or this is how much your appointment's going to cost? How many times have you gone to the doctor's appointment and you have no clue what they're going to charge you in the end? And then you get one bill and you pay it and you think you're done, and then you get a physician bill. So we're looking at, how do we enhance what we do to enhance the patient experience?
Right. No, I think that really embodies the whole experience, I think, outcomes that we can get to. And to power some of these experiences, I think while technology is really at the core of most business processes today and operations within an enterprise, the applications and systems, technology systems that are being used, a lot of them are they were like more legacy system of record kind of applications. So in that evolution, as we evolve those system of records into systems of intelligence, into systems of experience, right, to power these experiences, how can automation really play a role, right? So Claire, maybe if you have some thoughts into that transition, right? A lot of these, like, you can just rip off your existing systems, put in a new one that is newer, better, faster. But in that transition, is there an automation route which is easier, faster to get to?
I would say that's many dimensions, and I think it's very true for different industries. And when Kelly was talking about the medical field and connecting the customer experience with in-house experience and employees, it's very much the same thing in the financial industry, where it's all about the customer, but how do we improve that is by making it easier for our staff to then provide services to the customer. in terms of technology and legacy systems, it would be nice if we could all start from scratch and implement the new and latest technologies and everything that is working a lot better than what we've had for many years. It's not the reality. The reality is we have to replace systems from time to time, and those initiatives take a long time. So it gets worse before it gets better. That's usually the experience from a user standpoint. So how do we make that transition easier and smoother? This is where automation can definitely play a role in potentially avoiding entering data into two different systems, automating some of the QA and testing, and making it easier across the implementation timeline and chain to really get to the requirements of the users and make sure that when we deploy things in production, then it is well understood. Automation has also allowed to some extent to connect systems that were not connected in the past and postpone some of the broader initiatives and bigger transformation, because we all know resources are scarce and funding is not always available. So it's where it has helped make some of the decisions. And what I have seen as well is some of the new systems that are coming online don't necessarily have all the capabilities that we're looking for from out the gate. And automation can help alleviate some of those shortcomings. And at that point, it doesn't become a configuration nightmare, or it doesn't become something that is just impossible to do. So I've seen very much different situations where automation has been very helpful.
Right. And I think just shifting gears a bit, right? We spoke about the vision for automation, the kind of outcomes that we can drive through it. But when you actually come to executing and implementing automation in actual scenarios, one of the ways in which companies, first of all, prioritize where to actually deploy automation is through a lot of discovery journeys that they go through, right? And this was done more manually, traditionally, talking to process experts, to functional owners, to business heads and stakeholders like those. Today, we have, fortunately, process intelligence technologies around process mining, task mining, process mapping that can help do that much more effectively in much more structured and data-driven fashion, right? And maybe Jed, I think given that Nintex has a big role in providing that kind of a platform to the ecosystem today, do you have some thoughts in terms of whether process intelligence itself is evolving? Because I think earlier, like we were discussing, it was more focused on just on where could you get the biggest bang for the buck, right? Where could you optimize costs in the biggest manner? But today, probably the question you want to ask is how can I select the processes where I can impact the experience in the most effective fashion, right? So, how do you see process intelligence and automation sort of come together to deliver on that vision?
Well, process sniffers have been around for a long, long time. I mean, the first one I think ever created was IBM brought out Lombardi's platform. It feels like a million years ago. And Lombardi had its own process sniffer in it way back when. And ever since that time, multiple attempts have been made to create, tools and platforms that could go in and help people find, things about the way work was being done within their organizations. Some worked better than others. Some worked on certain platforms, not others. And it's still sort of the case today until some of the newer technologies like the one we've created at Nintex has been generated because of the flexibility in the architecture and things allows us to go across multiple platforms. It works very differently. Again, just the evolution of the technology that allows these tools to be much more eclectic and work. I think what we're going to see as we continue in process intelligence is that next evolution. So what we're going to see, and I think our vision for it is, it allows two very simple kind of use cases right off the get-go. So for people, for example, like Claire and myself, I go back to my banking days. If we've got a very heavy regulated industry, right? And all of a sudden we get this brand new set of regulatory requirements from our friends that are driving SOX, right? And all of a sudden they say, we need you to do blah, blah, blah. And all of a sudden you look and you go to your ops guys and the ops guys say, well, we don't have any of that stuff mapped out. Well, you better go in and look at what you have done today. Well, process intelligence tool can go in and find those processes and feed into, for example, our tool will actually be able to feed into our ProMap tool, which automatically map those things out for you. So it'll find them and discover them as they exist today, map it out for you. And then you can sit down, and I think Kelly was talking about this and Claire was too. You can sit down before you go and automate, or even if you don't even want to automate, if you just have to prove that you have it to your regulator, you can say, well, that's the way we do it today, because a regulator doesn't get to say to you, oh, that's good or bad. They just want to make sure you have it. So it's these kind of things that you can do with the tool. And then you can go to the next step, which is then you can actually take it to your OE, your operational excellence team, and say, well, we want to make it better than what it is today because it may not meet regulatory standards. You can take it to your automation team and say, great, well, we've made it as good as we can do it with Lean Sigma, but there's a lot of places there. Can't we use some kind of automation to make the experience better, take the risk down? Maybe we won't even care about costs. Actually, sometimes the process may cost us more money to do it the right way, but it drives the experience higher. So I think that's really what the beauty of these new generation process discovery tools or process intelligence tools, let's call them that. The process intelligence tools are going to allow us to do that. You'll get better intelligence and insights about what's going on inside your business. You then get to make the decision about what's your next best action. And that's really critical, because next best action is really kind of taking you to that next generation of what we would all, I think all of us have been around automation for a while, is the Shangri-La of everything, which is being able to automate the automation process. So what's the next best action once I know this is what I've got? What do I do now? And I think that's really what we're all trying to work towards, so that business people can have the rights to understand and have the intelligence to understand, here's where I am, what do I want to do next?
Right. And Claire, I think we spoke briefly earlier about process intelligence. We know you are experimenting with the technology. What is the vision you have, and what are some of the outcomes in terms of those synergies with automation that you are looking to explore with that tech?
Sure. I would say from an ecosystem standpoint, it is adding the process discovery upstream so that we have a logical way and an objective way to look at the data and see which ones need improvement, what's standard, what's not standard. And then moving over from an RPA standpoint, a workflow automation, and then all the way to OCR technology and more of an automation of unstructured data. So being able to provide that as a service across the organization is the next level of automation and self-sufficiency that we're looking to make available more broadly. Obviously, we need to make sure those systems are connected and that the experience is seamless from a user standpoint. It is definitely the future in terms of, I have an issue, something is not working. How can we find out what is the issue, what is the bottleneck, and then how to fix it in potentially one way, right? If we have a process mining tool that then comes out with a process map, then can fit into an automation tool and then come up with maybe the blueprint of an RPA bot or something, or workflow automation, then we're 50% of the way, and the human element of adding to that and testing it becomes much less time consuming. So that is really from an integrated end-to-end standpoint what we're looking at making available.
Got it. And maybe, Chris, I can get your thoughts on the next question that we had, right? So I think we hear these numerous technologies. We hear about process intelligence. I think you spoke about orchestration. Of course, I think people, when they think about automation, RPA is probably the first thing that comes to their mind. I think there were conversations around low code. How should companies really think about all of these different technologies, and like what is the best way about going ahead and formulating your technology strategy when you think about your automation program or even your larger digital transformation program? Right?
It's always a loaded question when you say, like, what is the best way? Obviously, like there's variations, but what I will give you is sort of like a true north. we've got about 25,000 global customers. And so True North being, what do we see as like the center mass with how those customers typically succeed at scale? I'd say it's a few things. One is, and maybe this goes without saying, but start with the right people. And it sounds a little crazy for a product company to say don't start with the technology, but we encourage our customers to not start thinking about the technology, but first start with the right people. So find leaders that are intellectually curious, passionate about their work, and are servant leaders. Those are the ones that are going to investigate to make sure that they understand the problem that they're solving for. Like, what is the transformational value that we're trying to get out of the organization, not our automation program? And they're going to inspire people to get behind it, which means that it's going to have lasting effect. Second is understand the transformation you're trying to drive, and then adopt the appropriate technology. Too many times, I think we see leaders buying a technology and then seeking out areas to apply it. That's a black eye just waiting to happen. Anytime we see somebody just asking to buy technology, we ask them to slow down. And then I would say the third is just engage with technology vendors that do not want to sell to you. That's right. I'm a technology vendor telling you, do not engage technology vendors that want to sell to you, but rather sell with you. Like, they want to partner with you to drive positive change. I think that's like that seems to be the critical, true north for those large enterprises where we're seeing tremendous success in terms of the velocity. So they have the right direction and they're doing it with speed.
Got it. And then Kelly, what are your thoughts on this? How did you think about your technology strategy? I think you started, I think relatively, I think it's a young program in that sense, right? Couple of years. What has been your evolution of the technology strategy for automation?
Well, I'm gonna give Chris a virtual high five because I couldn't agree more with everything he just said. The people are the most important thing. So you really have to get partners. And when I say partners, you have to partner with these folks. They've got to drive it within their organization. I can't go to another department and say, do this, right? They trust and they believe that department leader. So it's really all about getting the appropriate sponsorship. And so we have an automation advisory group, which are at the VP level. And these are folks that are driving transformational change within their individual departments. Another key aspect is education and training across the board. And it be very, very specific to how automation and innovation will impact them. Because what is the question that everybody is asking right now? I don't want to automate because what's going to happen? I'm going to lose my job. In the same sentence, they're saying, I've got so much work to do. I don't know what I'm going to do, right? So I think it's so important to tie those two together to say, you may not be doing this job, but you will have a job. We don't have enough people to run the organization as it is. So I think really understanding that, building that culture of automation is key as well. And having that backbone to make sure that you've got the right people involved, just like Chris said, I think that that's a winning strategy, and it's been working very, very well for us.
Got it. And yeah, I think technology is only one piece of the puzzle, but even having the right talent, skills, and partners to deploy that automation and the platforms that you will be leveraging is the other sort of conundrum that people have, right? So you have numerous options even there, right? You could go with more of some of the GSI partners. You could think about some of the more niche partners which are just focused on automation, or you could even build in-house sort of capabilities, right? And maybe Jet, I could get your thoughts in terms of how should companies think about that part of the puzzle in terms of just thinking about building deployment and implementation capabilities for the programs.
Well, I think again, having been on both sides of this, right? So I built the first program in financial services at Bank of New York Mellon back in 14 and 15, and back then the GSIs hadn't even they were just getting started. And, the joke I used to have with all the guys back then when they tried to come sell me, we're going to help you do your RPA implementation. I said, really? So you're going to take my watch and tell me what time it is then, right? Because again, they didn't know any more than we did because they hadn't done anything yet. And so I think it's a much different game now. They have a lot of those guys have lots of experience, and we work with all of them. They're great. And, having been on that side of it, we had to do it in-house. We had to teach ourselves how to do it. And we did wind up using one of the big GSIs as support. So when we had a capacity plan that when we got to over capacity, we'd come in and we'd bring them in to help us out because we had over 1,000 digital workers working at any point in time in our bank. So at times we had to have extra people helping us build those. And I think, again, you have to have the strategy. And I think it's very key. Kelly and Clairval talked about this. And I know Chris will have it with his customers as well as they consult with them and help them. But there's also there's a fourth way that you have help. You have professional services by the vendors that can come in and help you. And I think it's a combination. Like oftentimes when I was at Blue Prism, we would partner with the GSIs or the boutiques. We'd put professional services people with our partners and go in and help deliver services, training. It could be, we call accelerator programs. We'd go in and do assessment programs with them. So there's a lot of different combinations. And I think when you're building your strategy, depends upon where you are in your maturity cycle in that strategy. So if you're starting out, that's one type of strategy you're going to have. So it's how do you get to value as quickly as possible? And you've got to understand what your budget is. So, and again, do you have relationships with GSIs already? Because a lot of times bigger firms will already sign SOWs. So you already might have a nice little cachet that you can tap into. And that's why, again, as Kelly pointed out, it's so important to bring in all the stakeholders because you might be able to leverage relationships that already exist in the firm that you don't know about. So I think that's really key, important to understand that. And I think, again, each of those different types of partner relationships bring those advantages. Some of the boutiques have very key niches that they can bring to you that the GSIs may not have. And again, depends on how those relationships, how your firms work. Some firms that I've worked for banks that just didn't want to use any consultants whatsoever. There were moratoriums against them. So again, there's just certain things you kind of got to get to know. And then if you decide that, you're in an organization that says we're going to go alone, you can't really go alone because you've got to figure out where you're going to get the experience because you got to have experience. So that means you're going to have to hire that experience. Talent, trying to hire experience is expensive. And so you've got to think about that. So, and it takes time because you have to transplant that experience. That experience then has to grow other experience. So there's all these little trade-offs. And that's why I always come back to what's the time value equation that the organization is expecting you to achieve. So do they want you break even in the first year? Do they want a positive ROI in the first year? What do they want? Do they want customer sat scores to go from here to here in the first? What is it? Because all these things will drive how you're going to use the resources that you need to be able to deliver the value that the organization is asking you to deliver with that initiative. And so again, there's so many more resources available today than there were when I did it back in 14 and 15. And I think, again, it gives so many, it's an advantage now versus the way it was, 7 years ago. And again, I think it's up to really the strategy of the organization. That's the business strategy, the overall operating strategy. How does the company work? How do they do these things? Because that's really important. One of the things I would always try to coach other companies on, don't make your automation program look any differently than any other project you run, because if you set it up as a unicorn, you're just setting yourself up with a big target on your back. If you say, well, I'm special, oh boy, oh man, you're going to get all kinds of scrutiny, and finance will be looking over you, and legal and compliance, and everybody's going to be looking at you differently. You have to understand that you're running this just like a normal project. It's a transformation program. So abide by the same rules and conditions, and do the things that you would normally do, but just out execute everybody else. That's the key.
Got it. And I think we are almost at the end of time. I just want to squeeze in one more question. we spoke about the vision and the design part of the program. We spoke about the execution of it. But when you actually deploy automation, how do you think about the measuring the impact that you're creating, and especially in this experience paradigm? I think it becomes even more tricky to do that. So Claire, I think very quickly, if you want to share some thoughts in terms of how would you go about doing that?
Sure. So we all deploy some of those digital workers into production, create automations, and we typically measure the effectiveness through cost avoidance or number of manual hours saved, or in our case, because we're a bank, potentially controls that are being automated as opposed to being manual, which would make the auditors and the regulators happier. But we also don't lose sight over time of what those automations have done. So let's say we've put automations in production a few years ago, we're still measuring the benefits of what those automations are doing, because volumes have changed, things have changed. And we want to make sure that we keep track and holistic of not only the work that we're currently working on, but also everything else that's part of that automation ecosystem, because we still have maintenance costs and production costs and other costs. So we want to make sure that we have a total cost of ownership, and that we also have visibility around all the efficiencies that those automations have provided over time.
Got it. No, thanks so much, Claire, for sharing those thoughts. And really, I think very interesting, insightful discussions with all of you. I know I think we always run out of time on these topics. So I think we can never sort of conclude some of these discussions in time. But again, thank you everyone for joining in, and hope you have a good day ahead.
Thanks so
Thank you
much.
for having us.
Thanks.
Thank you.